At 3:00 p.m., June 17, 2016, in the Mediterranean, the 200-ton USS Gravely was sailing a routine course when the Russian frigate Yaroslav Mudry suddenly accelerated, aggressively slicing toward the American destroyer's stern. This wasn't a mistake. It was Moscow's direct challenge: provoke the Americans. The Russian captain aimed to force the U.S. warship to flinch, but his vessel became a 4,000-ton guided missile heading for disaster. In the Combat Information Center, the Aegis system screamed collision warnings. Exactly 230 feet less than the wingspan of a B-52 bomber separated an international incident from a catastrophic tragedy. The U.S. Navy crew had mere seconds to maintain their legal course and assert their dominance, or watch this Cold War relic accidentally drag the world into a hot conflict. They were about to learn that challenging an Aegis destroyer's resolve is the single most spectacularly stupid idea on the high seas. This confrontation was not an accident. It was a deliberate escalation, a calculated piece of brinkmanship straight out of the Cold War playbook that many thought had been shelved forever. The stage for this drama was the Eastern Mediterranean, one of the world's most crucial and contested crossroads. It is a region where the interests of NATO allies, particularly the United States, Greece, and Turkey, intersect directly with Russia's strategic need to maintain access and project power from its naval base in Tartus, Syria. For decades, the U.S. Sixth Fleet has been the guarantor of stability and the physical embodiment of the international rules-based maritime order across these waters. When you see a Gravely, a $1.8 billion warship displacing over 200 tons operating in these seas, you are looking at more than just a ship. You are looking at a 44-story-tall floating sovereign piece of American territory designed to keep global trade flowing and the balance of power steady. Her mission on this day was routine: to transit international waters in accordance with the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, or COLREGs, the globally recognized rules of the maritime road that every professional Navy respects. But for Moscow, maintaining stability is not the goal. Disruption is the objective, and every U.S. transit is seen as an opportunity for harassment and intelligence gathering. This aggressive, dangerous maneuvering by the Russian frigate was a direct political message, a throwback to the days of Soviet trolling designed to demonstrate perceived strength and exploit any perceived weakness in the U.S. command chain or crew discipline. It was a high-stakes geopolitical poker game played on the sea, with the chips being the lives of hundreds of sailors and the reputation of two world powers. In the age of YouTube and instant global news, the consequences of a mistake, whether diplomatic or physical, would be immediate and catastrophic. This is a story of how superior technology, rigorous training, and professional restraint turned a moment of maximum danger into a textbook demonstration of American competence. If you appreciate the dedication and discipline of our sailors, who face this kind of pressure every day, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, because these are the stories the mainstream media often misses. Now let's introduce the challenger. The Russian frigate, the Yaroslav Mudry, hull number 777. The name, which translates to Yaroslav the Wise, carries an historical weight the Russian Navy clearly intends to project, but the ship itself is a product of late Cold War design, a Project 11540 Neustrashimy-class frigate. Commissioned in 2009, she represents a mid-sized multi-role platform designed to hunt submarines and protect convoys. But while she is capable with a displacement of around 200 tons, she is physically dwarfed by the massive Gravely, giving her a significant disadvantage in a game of brute force maneuvering. The psychology behind her action is crucial here. Her captain was not simply making a mistake, he was executing a predetermined, calculated test. Their motives were threefold: first, to close with the Gravely and trigger the American ship's internal electronic warfare EW systems and radars, effectively collecting an electronic signature fingerprint of the destroyer's sensors, which is invaluable intelligence. Second, to photograph and record the reaction of the American crew, looking for any sign of panic, poor seamanship, or a violation of their rules of engagement. And third, to use the sheer audacity of the maneuver to generate state media propaganda back home, showing a supposedly decisive Russian warship pushing around a larger American vessel. The threat she posed was real. The Mudry is armed with 8 Kh-35 SSN-25 Switchblade anti-ship cruise missiles, formidable weapons that skim the wave tops at high subsonic speed, capable of doing serious damage to a destroyer. She also carries the Kinjal SAN-9 Gauntlet surface-to-air missile system, the naval equivalent of the Tor system. But her ultimate threat on this day was not her missiles. It was her reckless disregard for the basic rules of the sea, transforming her into a 4,000-ton guided projectile. By violating international law, the Mudry became, for a tense few minutes, an unguided missile, turning the routine exercise into a life-or-death scenario for the sailors of both nations, a situation that could have instantly spiraled out of control and created the accidental war that military professionals dread. The response to this deliberate provocation was anchored not in missile silos, but in a vast network of systems designed for maximum awareness and disciplined restraint. The American preparation. The USS Gravely is an Arleigh Burke Flight I-2A destroyer, the backbone of the U.S. fleet, and her defensive strength lies in one name: Aegis. The Aegis combat system, the $100 billion nervous system of the Navy, is the reason the Gravely can manage 1,000 threats simultaneously. Her primary sensor, the AN/SPI-1DV radar, is a four-faced fixed array that constantly scans the sky, sea, and land in a 360-degree radius, capable of detecting a golf ball at 100 miles. On this afternoon, the SPY-1 was not just seeing the Yaroslav Mudry. It was tracking every propeller revolution, every course correction, and every centimeter of the Russian vessel's movement with perfect, cold mathematical precision. Inside the Gravely's Combat Information Center, or CIC, the scene was one of contained absolute professionalism. There was no shouting, no panic, only the calm, measured voices of highly trained sailors. The Tactical Action Officer, or TAO, was the central point, analyzing the incoming threat assessment from the ship's computer, which classified the Mudry's maneuver as a clear high-risk violation of Colreg's Rule 13, the Overtaking Rule, and Rule 8, the action to avoid collision. The Gravely was the stand-on vessel. The Mudry was the give-way vessel. The Gravely had the right-of-way and the obligation to maintain course and speed until collision was imminent. The Russian ship, by attempting to cut across the Gravely's stern within 7 kilometers, was actively and dangerously violating that rule, the ultimate absolute last line of defense. The weapon that embodies American technological dominance was the Phalanx CIWS Block 1B, the close-in weapon system. This system, with its 6 barrels capable of spewing 400 to 500 rounds of 20mm tungsten alloy per minute, operates autonomously. In a moment of panic, its dedicated radar would have locked onto the Russian ship, automatically waiting for the split-second decision from the TAO or the ship's captain to authorize a short, decisive burst. This technical preparation, the knowledge that the ship could defend itself with overwhelming force in the blink of an eye, is what allowed the crew to exercise the one thing the Russians did not expect: professional patience. The climax was a continuous accelerating duel of seamanship and nerves. As the Yaroslav Mudry accelerated to approximately 20 knots, she began her final reckless approach, aiming to pass so close to the Gravely's stern that the U.S. ship would be forced to take evasive action, effectively letting the Russian captain dictate the rules of the road. On the bridge of the Gravely, the captain, an experienced destroyer commander, maintained his calm posture, his hand hovering near the ship's internal command console. His bridge crew called out the diminishing range in a monotone chorus. Contact bearing 350, closing range 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. The ship's automated collision avoidance system was now shrieking its digitized warning, the kind of alarm that sends ice down the spine of every sailor who understands what 2 large vessels doing 30 knots relative speed can do to each other. The Russian captain was pushing the envelope past the breaking point, a direct challenge to the U.S. commitment to international law. At the 200-meter mark, the captain made his decision. He did not turn the wheel, which would have been an illegal maneuver for the stand-on vessel. Instead, he ordered a minor but highly effective adjustment to the ship's propulsion. "All engines 15 knots, steady course," he commanded. The change in engine noise, the subtle increase in wake, was enough to send a clear non-verbal message to the Russian crew. "We see you. We are maintaining our legal course. Your reckless action is your problem, not ours." The critical moment arrived when the Yaroslav Mudry cut across the Gravely's wake, passing so close that the Russian frigate was a physical blur to the sailors on the American bridge wing. The closest point of approach was, as Pentagon officials later confirmed, just 70 meters or 230 feet. For a few horrifying seconds, the bow of the Gravely and the stern of the Mudry were separated by a distance that any veteran sailor knows is a recipe for disaster in open water. On the CIC's thermal display, the Russian ship glowed with the heat of an engine pushed to its limits, its crew likely holding their breath. but the U.S. crew held fast their discipline and impenetrable shield. The Gravely's captain, with a masterful display of nautical restraint, refused to be provoked, letting the Russian vessel pass safely but barely into the clear, asserting the Gravely's legal and moral authority without ever resorting to a defensive maneuver that could have been misconstrued as aggressive. The Russian vessel failed to force the American to flinch, and in this subtle, silent moment, the tactical advantage was decisively won by the American destroyer. The aftermath was silent, immediate, and utterly clear. The Yaroslav Mudry, having failed to force the American ship off course, continued her transit for a few minutes before peeling away her dramatic demonstration, having achieved nothing but to put her own crew and vessel in grave danger. No shots were fired, no missiles were launched, and no collisions occurred. The USS Gravely simply settled back onto her assigned course of 13 knots. The crew in the CIC calmly standing down from general quarters, securing the CIWS, and returning the ship to Condition 3. The victory was total, non-violent, and completely definitive. The Russians lost on every measurable front. They lost the technical confrontation because the Gravely was able to maintain full situational awareness using its AN/SPI-1DV radar, confirming the threat and tracking it without resorting to countermeasures that would have provided them with valuable intelligence. They lost the legal argument instantly, as the American destroyer was the stand-on vessel legally maintaining its course and speed while the Russian frigate committed a flagrant, dangerous violation of international law. But most importantly, they lost the psychological battle. The American crew demonstrated the kind of professional discipline and restraint that is the true hallmark of a first-rate Navy, a calm efficiency that contrasts sharply with the frantic, reckless maneuvering of the Mudry. The only damage was diplomatic. The U.S. Department of Defense quickly released a statement calling the Russian maneuvers unsafe and unprofessional, ensuring the entire world knew which Navy was responsible for the dangerous confrontation. For the U.S. Navy, the price paid was simply another spike in adrenaline and another day of perfect, successful deterrence. For the Russian Navy, it was the cost of a humiliated captain and an undeniable public demonstration that when it comes to naval professionalism, their Cold War tactics are simply no match for American training and technology. The ultimate takeaway from this high-stakes encounter is simple yet profound. The sea is not a place for chaos. It is a domain governed by rules, and in modern military confrontation, the rules themselves become one of the most powerful weapons in a professional Navy's arsenal. The Russian captain's assumption was that he could intimidate a superior American warship. His fatal flaw was misunderstanding that the USS Gravely was not merely a collection of steel and missiles. It was a perfect system of technical superiority, doctrinal discipline, and absolute adherence to international law. In that tense moment, the U.S. Navy demonstrated that their professionalism and their commitment to the Colregs are as effective a defense against aggression as any missile in their vertical launch system. The lesson for Moscow, a lesson they seem to constantly need reminding of, is that you cannot win a game of chicken when your opponent is operating a machine designed by engineers and commanded by sailors who prioritize safety and the law over reckless bravado. The integrity of the international seas will always belong to those who master not only the technology to sail them, but the discipline to navigate them responsibly. This incident stands as a clear warning. America's global presence is steady, professional, and entirely unyielding. And those who attempt to provoke an incident will only expose their own vulnerabilities. We want to know what you think. Does this kind of dangerous brinkmanship increase your fear of an accidental conflict, or does the professional restraint of the U.S. Navy reassure you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.